Hello there, friends. It's Miss Stephanie from the Chester Public Library, back with another virtual Read Aloud book club. If you've been tuning in and listening all along, you'll know that we are reading the BFG by Roald Dahl. We are about to start part 6 of our journey. We left off at the chapter called Dreams. If you haven't been caught up, you might want to go back and watch the other videos so you can be caught up on our story, because we're going to jump right back in. Dreams. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby, watching him at work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream they had caught that day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. "What are you writing?" Sophie asked him. "Every dream is having its special label on the bottle," the BFG said. "How else could I be finding the one I'm wanting in a hurry?" "But can you really and truly tell what sort of a dream it's going to be simply by listening to it?" Sophie asked. "I can," the BFG said, not looking up. "But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes?" "You is less or more right," the BFG said. "Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzy hum music. And these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music." "By music, do you mean tunes?" "I's not meaning tunes." "Then what do you mean?" "Human beings is having their own music, right or left." "Right," said Sophie. "Lots of music. And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they's hearing wondrous music. They's getting shivers down their spindles, right or left." "Right," Sophie said. "So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what the message is, but is loving it just the same." "That's about right," Sophie said. "But because of these jump-squiffling ears of mine," the BFG said, "I's not only able to hear the music that dreams is making, but I's understanding it also." "What do you mean, understanding it?" Sophie said. "I can read it," the BFG said. "It talks to me. It's like a language." "I find that just a little hard to believe," Sophie said. "I'll bet you's also finding it hard to believe in cogwinkles," the BFG said. "And how is they's visiting us from the stars?" "Of course I don't believe that," Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. "I hope you will forgive me," he said, "if I tell you that human beings is thinking they's very clever, but they's not. They's nearly all of them non-munchers and squick peeps." "I beg your pardon," Sophie said. "The matter with human beings," the BFG went on, "is that they's absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they's actually seeing it right in front of their own schnozzles. Of course, cogwinkles is existing. I's meeting them oftenly. I's even chittering to them." He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read what he had written so far. The letters were printed big and bold, but they were not very well formed. Here is what it said. "This dream is about how I is saving my teacher from drowning. I's diving into the river from a high bridge, and I's dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I's giving him the kiss of death." "A kiss of what?" Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. "I's telling you once before," he said quietly, "that I's never having a chance to go to school. I's full of mistakes. This not my fault. I does my best. You's a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know Everything yourself." "I'm sorry," Sophie said. "I really am. It is very rude of me to keep correcting you." The BFG gazed at her for a while longer, then he bent his head again to his slow, laborious writing. "Tell me honestly," Sophie said, "if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning by diving off the bridge?" "More," the BFG said, "a lot more." "But I cannot be scribbling the whole globe something dream on a titchy bit of paper. Of course there's more." The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. "Yes," he said, nodding his great head solemnly up and down. "This dream is continuing very nice. It has a very dory hunky ending." "How does it end?" Sophie said. "Please tell me." "You would be dreaming," the BFG said. that the morning after you is saving the teacher from the river and is arriving at school, you seen all the 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall and all the teachers as well, and the head teacher is then standing up and saying, I was wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave and living and saving the life of our fine arithmetic teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is then cheering like mad and shouting, bravo, well done. And forever after that, even when you was getting your sums all gung swiggled and muggled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you's waking up. I like that dream, Sophie said. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It is Fizz Wizard. He licked the back of the label and stuck it on the jar. I was usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, he said, but just watching me and making me jumpsy. I'll go and sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully and I think you'll be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar and there, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of color in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small oblong sea green jellyfish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful, but pulsing gently. The whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. What will you feed it on? Sophie asked. It is not needing any food, the BFG told her. That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs food of some sort, even trees and plants. The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving, it touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody is feeling it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting peaceably forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before. But perhaps after all, I was letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here's some of the good dreams, the fizzy wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? Sophie said. My labels is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. The dreams is usually much longer. The labels is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. Today I was sitting in class and I discovered that if I started staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I was able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her and in the end her head drops onto her desk and she goes fast to sleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher and he shouts, Wake up, Miss Plumbridge, how dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave the school forever, you is sacked. But in a jiffy I was putting the head teacher to sleep as well. And he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumbridge. And then I was hearing my mummy's voice saying, Wake up, your breakfast is ready. What a funny dream, Sophie said. It's a ring beller, the BFG said. It's wopsy. Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other one, but perhaps a trifle larger. Do you have separate dreams for boys and for girls? Sophie asked. Of course, said the BFG. If I was giving a girl's dream to a boy, even if it was a really wopsy girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking what a rat-bungling, gunk-sludging old dream that was. Boys would, Sophie said. These here is all girls' dreams on the shelf, the BFG said. Can I read a boy's dream? You can, the BFG said, and he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows. I was making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I was able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. I was walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she's starting to yell at me, as she always does. Yelling, what on earth is you doing up there, walking on the ceiling? And I looks down at her and I smiles, and I says, I told you you was driving me up the wall, and now you has done it. I found that one rather silly, Sophie said. Boys wouldn't, the BFG said, grinning. It's another real ring beller. Perhaps you have seen enough now. Let me read another boy's one, Sophie said. The next label said, if telephone rings in your house and my father picks it up and says it in his very important telephone voice, Simpkin speaking, then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny and he says, what? Who? And he says, yes, sir, I understand, but surely it is me you is wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son. My father's face is going from white to dark purple and he is gulping like he is a lobster stuck in his throat. And then at last he's saying, yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir. And he turns to me and he says in a rather respectful voice, is you knowing the President of the United States? And I says, no, but I didn't expect he's hearing about me. Then I was having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way. And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head. And that is when I was hearing my father's real voice saying, get up, you lazy slob, or you'll be late for school. Boys are crazy, Sophie said. Let me read this next one. Sophie started reading the next label. I was having a bath and I was discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me and suddenly my legs is not there nor is my arms. In fact, I've become absolutely invisible all over. I'm still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So when my mommy comes in and says, where's that child? He was in the bath a minute ago and he can't possibly have washed himself properly. So I says, here I is, and she says, where? And I says, here, and she says, where? And I says, here, and she yells, Henry, come up quick! And then my daddy rushes in, and I was washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air. But of course, he's not seeing me, and he shouts, where are you, boy? And I says, here, and he says, where? And I says, here, and he says, where? And I says, here. And he says, the soap, boy, the soap, it's flying in the air. And I press my tummy button again, and now I'm visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement, and he says, you is the invisible boy. And I says, now it's going to have some fun. So when I was out of the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible. And I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I was wearing. So when people seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there's a panic with everybody yelling, a ghost, a ghost! And people are screaming left and right, and big strong policeman is running around for their lives. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummet, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and I say, boo! And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub. And then I was waking up and feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is very mystical things, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them all. Not even the brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough? Just this last one, Sophie said. This one here. She started reading. I have written a book and it is so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you is so hooked on it you cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the street, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book, and dentists is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they's all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they's operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they's running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I'm still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer in the world has ever known, until my mommy comes in and says, I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really, your spelling is atrocious, so is your punctuation. That's enough for now, the BFG said. There's billions more, but my arm is getting tired holding you up. What are all those over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I was catching so many dreams I was not having the time or energy to write out long labels. But there's enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. I was climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I was inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I I was able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I was only an 8-year-old little boy, but I was growing a splendid bushy beard and all the other boys is jealous. I was able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I've been wondering how long it is before you asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous, Sophie said. How did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, very old and tattered by human standards. It was an ordinary-sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. One night, he said, I was blowing a dream through the window and I sees this book lying on the little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I was refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? Sophie asked. I borrowed it, said the BFG, smiling a little. Just for a short time I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Perhaps only about 80 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? Sophie asked him. I was reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said. And I'm still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumdiddlyumptious book. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud. By Dahl's Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Just then there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That's all the giants zip-fizzing off to another country to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket, then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at a full gallop. Where's you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all of us flush bunking off to England tonight, answered the flesh lump-eater as they went galloping past. England is such a luscious land, who is fencing a few little nice English chittlers. Aye, shouted the maid masher, I's knowing where there's a giggle house for girls, and I's guzzling myself full as a froth blower. And I knows where there's a boggle box for boys, shouted the gizzard gulper. All I have to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasted extra lick squishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket. What's a giggle house for girls? He's meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He will be eating them by the bundle. Oh no, cried Sophie. And boys from a boys' school, said the BFG. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried out. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit there and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do, the BFG said. We's helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy rock, blue rock, near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until they's coming back, he said. The sun had dipped below the horizon and it was getting dark. Next chapter, the great plan. We've absolutely got to stop them, Sophie cried. Put me back in your pocket quick and we'll chase after them and warn everyone in England they're coming. Redunculous and impossible, the BFG said. They's going 2 times as fast as me and they's finishing their guzzle before we is halfway. We can't just sit here doing nothing, Sophie cried. How many girls and boys are they going to eat tonight? Many, the BFG said. The flesh lump-eating giant alone has most squackling wopsy appetite. Will he snatch them out of their beds while they're sleeping? Like peas out of a puddle, the BFG said. I can't bear to think of it, Sophie cried. Then don't, the BFG said. For years and years I sitting here on this very rock every night after night when they's galloping away, and I's feeling so sad for all the human beings that they's going to gobble up. I has to get used to it. There's nothing I can do. If I wasn't a twitchy little runty giant only 24 feet high, then I'd be stepping them. But that is absolutely out of the window. Do you always know where they're going? Sophie asked. Always, the BFG said. Every night they's yelling at me as they go boodling past. The other day they was yelling, "We's off the Mississippi and Missouri to guzzle them both." Disgusting, Sophie said. I hate them. She and the big friendly giant sat quietly side by side on the blue rock in the gathering dusk. Sophie had never felt so hopeless in her life. After a while, she stood up and cried out, "I can't stand it. Just think of those poor girls and boys who are getting to be eaten alive in a few hours' time. I can't just sit here and do nothing. We've got to go after those brutes." "No," the BFG said. "We must," Sophie cried. "Why won't you go?" The BFG sighed and shook his head firmly. "I have told you 5 or 6 times," he said, "and the third will be the last. I is never showing myself to human beings." "Why ever not?" "If I do, they'll be putting me in the zoo with all the giraffes and caterpillars." "Nonsense," Sophie said, "and they'll be sending you straight back to the orphanage. Grown-up human beings is not famous for their kindness. They's all squiffle rotters and grudge sledgers." "It simply isn't true," Sophie cried angrily. "Some of them are very kind indeed." "Who?" the BFG said. "Name one." "The Queen of England," Sophie said. "You can't call her a squiffle rotter or grink sludger." "Well," the BFG said, "you can't call her a squeak pip or a nut muncher either," Sophie said, getting angrier and angrier. "The flesh lump eater is longing dearly to guzzle her up," the BFG said, smiling a little now. "Who? The Queen?" Sophie cried, aghast. "Yes," the BFG answered. "Flesh lump eater says he is never eating a queen, and he thinks perhaps she has an especially scramdiddly-umptious flavor." "How dare he?" Sophie cried. "But Flesh Lump Eater says there's too many soldiers around her palace and he doesn't try it." "He'd better not," Sophie said. "He's also saying he would like very much to guzzle one of the soldiers in his pretty red suit, but he's worried about those big black furry hats that he's wearing. He thinks they might be sticking in his throat." "I hope he chokes," Sophie said. "Flesh Lump Eater is a very careful giant," the BFG said. Sophie was silent for a few moments. Then suddenly, in a voice filled with excitement, she cried out, "I've got it! By golly, I think I've got it!" "Got what?" asked the BFG. "The answer!" cried Sophie. "We'll go to the Queen. That's a terrific idea. If I went and told the Queen about those disgusting man-eating giants, I'm sure she'd do something about it." The BFG looked down at her sadly and shook his head. "She's never believing you," he said. "Never in a month of Mondays." "I think she would." "Never," the BFG said. "It is sounding such a wonky tall story, the Queen will be laughing and saying, 'What awful rub squash!' She would not." "Of course she would," the BFG said. "I told you before that human beings is simply not believing in giants." "Then it's up to us to find a way of making her believe in them," Sophie said. "And how's you getting in to see the Queen anyway?" the BFG asked. "Now hold on a sec," Sophie said. "Just you hold on a sec, because I've got another idea." "Your ideas are full of crud, Swoggle," the great BFG said. "Not this one," Sophie said. "You say that if we tell the Queen, she would never believe us?" "I'm certain she wouldn't," the BFG said. "Well, we aren't going to tell her," Sophie said excitedly. "We don't have to tell her. We'll make her dream it." "That is an even more froth-bungling suggestion," the BFG said. "Dreams is lots of fun, but nobody's believing in dreams either. You's only believing in a dream while you is actually dreaming it. But as soon as you's waking up, you's saying, 'Oh, thank goodness it was only a dream.'" "Don't you worry about that part of it," Sophie said. "I can fix that." "Never can you fix it," the BFG said. "I can. I swear I can. But first of all, let me ask you a very important question. Here it is. Can you make a person dream absolutely anything in the world?" "Anything you like," the BFG said proudly. "If I said I wanted to dream that I was in a flying bathtub with silver wings, could you make me dream it?" "I could," the BFG said. "But how?" Sophie said. "You obviously don't have exactly that dream in your collection." "I do not," the BFG said. "But I could soon be mixing it up." "How could you mix it up?" "It is a little bit like mixing a cake," the BFG said. "If you was putting the right amounts of all the different things into it, you was making the cake come out as many ways as you want. Sugary, spongy, crunchy, Christmassy, grab-switchy. It is the same with dreams." "Go on," Sophie said. "I has dillions of dreams on my shelves, right or left?" "Right," Sophie said. "I has dreams about bathtubs, lots of them. I has dreams about silver wings. I has dreams about flying. So all I have to do is mix those dreams together in the proper way, and I's very quickly making a dream where you's flying in a bathtub with silver wings." "I see what you mean," Sophie said, "but I didn't know you could mix one dream with another." "Dreams like being mixed," the BFG answered. "They's getting very lonesome all by themselves in those glassy bottles." "Right," Sophie said. "Now then, do you have dreams about the Queen of England?" "Lots of them," the BFG said. "And about giants?" "Of course," the BFG said. "And about giants eating people?" Swiggles of them, said the BFG. And about little girls like me? Those is commonest of all, the BFG said. I has bottles and bottles of dreams about little girls, and you could mix them all up just as I want you to. And you could mix them all up just as I want you to? Sophie asked, getting more and more excited. Of course, the BFG said. But how is this helping us? I think you is barking up the wrong dog. Now hold on, Sophie said. Listen carefully. I want you to mix a dream which you will blow into the Queen of England's bedroom when she is asleep. And this is how it will go. Now hang on a minute, said the BFG. How was I possibly going to get near enough to the Queen of England's bedroom to blow in my dream? You was fucking dumb silly. I'll tell you that later, Sophie said. For the moment, please listen carefully. Here's the dream I want you to mix. Are you paying attention? Very close, the BFG said. I want the Queen to dream that 9 disgusting giants, each one about 50 feet tall, are galloping to England in the night. She must dream their names as well. What are their names again? Flesh Lump Eater, Man Hugger, Bone Cruncher, Jowl Chewer, Meat Dripper, Gizzard Gulper, Maid Masher, Blood Butler, and the Butcher Boy. Let her dream all those names, Sophie said, and let her dream that they will be creeping into England in the depths of the witching hour and snatching little boys and girls from their beds. Let her dream that they will be reaching into the bedroom windows and pulling the little boys and girls out of their beds, and then, Sophie paused. Do they eat them on the spot or do they carry them away first? She asked. They're usually just popping them straight into their mouths like popcorn, the BFG said. Put that in the dream, Sophie said. And then the dream must say that when their tummies are full, they will go galloping back to giant country where no one can find them. Is that all? The BFG said. Certainly not, said Sophie. You must then explain to the Queen in her dream that there is a big friendly giant who can tell her where all those beasts are living, so that she can send her soldiers and her armies to capture them once and for all. And now let her dream one last and very important thing. Let her dream that there's a little girl called Sophie sitting on her windowsill who will tell her where the big friendly giant is hiding. Where he is hiding? Asked the BFG. We'll come to that later, Sophie said. So the Queen dreams her dream, right? Right, the BFG said. Then she wakes up and the first thing she thinks is, oh, what a horrid dream. I'm so glad it was only a dream. And then she looks up from the pillow and what does she see? What does she see? The BFG asked. She sees a little girl called Sophie sitting in her windowsill right there in real life before her very eyes. How's you going to be sitting on the Queen's windowsill, may I beg? The BFG said. You are going to put me there, Sophie said. And that's the lovely part about it. If someone dreams that there's a little girl on her windowsill and then she wakes and sees the little girl is really sitting there, that's a dream come true, is it not? I was beginning to see where you're striving to, the BFG said. If the Queen is knowing that part of her dream is true, then perhaps she's believing the rest of it is true as well. That's about it, Sophie said, but I shall have to convince her of that myself. You said you was wanting the dream to state there's a big friendly giant who is also going to talk to the Queen? Absolutely, Sophie said. You must. You are the only one who can tell her where to find the other giants. How's I meeting the Queen? Asked the BFG. I's not wanting to be shooted at her by soldiers. The soldiers are only in the front of the palace, Sophie said. At the back, there's a huge garden and there are no soldiers in there at all. There's a very high wall with spikes on it around the garden to stop people climbing in. But you could simply walk over that. How's you knowing all this about the Queen's palace? The BFG asked. Last year I was in a different orphanage, Sophie said. It was in London and we used to go for walks all around there. Is you helping me to find this palace? The BFG asked. I's never dared to go hide and sneaking around London in my life. I'll show you the way, Sophie said confidently. I's frightened of London, the BFG said. Don't be, Sophie said. It's full of tiny dark streets and there are very few people around in the witching hour. The BFG picked Sophie up between one finger and a thumb and placed her gently in the palm of the other hand. Is the Queen's palace very big? He asked. Huge, Sophie said. Then how's we funding the red bedroom? That's up to you, Sophie said. You're supposed to be an expert at that sort of thing. And you's absolutely sure the Queen will not put me in a zoo with all the crocodile dillies? Of course she won't, Sophie said. You'll be a hero, and you'll never have to eat snozzcumbers again. Sophie saw the BFG's eyes widen. He licked his lips. You mean it? He said. You really mean it? No more disgusting snozzcumbers? You couldn't get one if you wanted to, Sophie said. Humans don't grow them. That did it. The BFG got to his feet. "When is you wanting me to mix the special dream?" he asked. "Now," Sophie said, "at once." "When's we going to see the Queen?" he said. "Tonight," Sophie said, "as soon as you've mixed the dream." "Tonight?" the BFG cried. "Why such a flush-bunking flurry? If we can't save tonight's children, we can anyway save tomorrow's." Sophie said, "What is more, I'm getting famished. I haven't had a thing to eat for 24 hours. "Then we'd better get cracking," the BFG said, moving back towards the cave. Sophie kissed him on the tip of his thumb. "I knew you'd do it," she said. "Come on, let's hurry." And that's where we're going to stop for today. It's getting really good. Are you excited to find out what happens next? I know I am. All right, my friends, thanks for joining me today for another virtual Read Aloud story time. I hope you're enjoying our story, and I hope you're talking about it at home with whoever's listening with you and having some really fun chats about the book, The BFG. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time where we continue our journey with The BFG by Roald Dahl. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next time.